Let's be brutally honest. You've been running from loneliness your entire life. Not walking, not ignoring, running. And maybe you didn't even realize it. You filled every silent pause with noise, every free moment with a screen, every quiet evening with distractions, TV, music, social media, anything to avoid that gnawing feeling that creeps in when you're truly alone. It wasn't because you're weak, it's because the world taught you to fear silence, to associate stillness with emptiness, to equate being alone with being unwanted. And that lesson, whether whispered to you by culture, media, or childhood wounds, carved itself into your nervous system. But here's the thing nobody ever told you. The enemy you've been running from, that loneliness, it was never here to destroy you. It was here to reveal you. What you've mistaken for punishment was an invitation. That ache in your chest when you're alone, that's not a flaw. It's a call back to yourself. But instead of answering it, you ran. You kept busy. You stayed surrounded by people who didn't understand you, conversations that drained you, experiences that distracted you, all so you wouldn't have to sit with you. But how long will you keep running? How many more years will pass with you avoiding your own presence? You've likely been in rooms filled with people and still felt invisible. You've been in relationships and still felt a hollow gap between your heart and theirs. You've smiled in photos and cried in silence, because no matter how many people you surround yourself with, you can't escape the truth. You feel alone because you've never truly met yourself. Loneliness isn't your enemy. Denial is. Avoidance is. The real pain isn't in being alone. It's in rejecting the person you find when you are. Here's what they won't teach you in school. The moment you stop fearing your own company is the moment you become truly free. Because when you face that silence, when you finally let yourself feel the discomfort without reaching for a distraction, you start to remember who you are beneath the noise, beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the masks. You remember your forgotten dreams, your buried truths, and your suppressed voice. The question isn't whether you're alone, it's whether you're willing to face the loneliness and find the gold hidden in its silence. Because only in solitude can the real conversation begin. And that conversation between you and your soul is the one that will change everything. From a young age, society plants the idea that being alone is a problem to be fixed. You're told that if you're not constantly surrounded by friends, something must be wrong with you. If you spend a Friday night alone, people assume you're antisocial, depressed, or broken. If you choose not to be in a relationship, they ask, "What's wrong with you?" As if solitude itself is a sign of failure. They never stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, the greatest strength is the ability to stand alone without fear. Think about it. Our world glorifies constant connection. We're taught to measure our worth by our social circle, relationship status, and how many followers we have. We're conditioned to chase validation in the form of likes, replies, and invitations. We've been trained like emotional athletes, sprinting toward the next social interaction to avoid the shame of stillness. But here's the truth they never talk about. Being alone doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're unworthy or unlovable. Sometimes it just means you're brave enough to step away from the noise, strong enough to listen to your own voice without needing others to echo it. The system fears those who choose solitude because they can't be easily controlled. Solitude breeds independence, and independence disrupts the fragile order of social conformity. If you don't need constant validation, you're harder to manipulate. If you're not desperate to belong, you're not easy to sell to. So they convince you, be alone and you'll be forgotten. Be alone and you'll fail. But the irony is this, many of the people you admire most were once alone. Creators, revolutionaries, thinkers, visionaries, they all walked the path of solitude. Not because they were broken, but because they were becoming something unshakable. The next time you hear that inner voice whispering that you're failing because you're alone, remember this. Solitude is not a defect. It is not a flaw. It is a conscious act of strength in a world addicted to noise. And that strength, that's where your power begins. You've been there before, in a room full of people, smiling, nodding, maybe even laughing, and yet feeling utterly invisible. Surrounded by noise but disconnected, participating in conversations that feel scripted, moments that feel hollow, faces that blur into one another, and you wonder silently, why do I feel so alone when I'm not even by myself? Because here's the harsh truth. Presence isn't the same as connection. Just because someone is near you doesn't mean they see you. Just because you're speaking doesn't mean you're heard. You can be shoulder to shoulder with a crowd and still feel like a ghost among the living. Loneliness doesn't come only from being alone. It comes from being unseen, misunderstood, out of sync with the environment around you. We've been conditioned to believe that the cure for emptiness is more interaction, more friends, more parties, more followers. But how many times have you left those very situations feeling emptier than when you arrived? How many conversations have you had that left you feeling drained instead of fulfilled? That's because the real emptiness isn't external. It's not the lack of people around you. It's the disconnection from yourself. You keep hoping someone in the crowd will say something that makes you feel whole, but that moment never comes because no one else can give you what you keep avoiding, your own presence. The crowd distracts you. It delays the confrontation, but it can't heal you. The healing begins in silence, in solitude, in that sacred moment when you finally sit with yourself and stop pretending. When you no longer reach outward to fill the void, but dare to look inward and feel it fully. You don't need more people around you. You need more truth within you. And the truth is this: no amount of noise will fill a soul that's starved for authenticity. No crowd can connect you to yourself. That's the real path, leaving behind the illusion of connection and stepping into the quiet where true connection begins. In a world obsessed with visibility, noise, and constant interaction, choosing solitude isn't just unusual, it's radical. It's a quiet revolution that defies everything society has taught you. When you deliberately step away from the crowd, from the likes, the messages, the social validation, you're not just taking a break, you're making a statement. Because chosen solitude isn't about isolation, it's about reclamation. It's reclaiming your time, your energy, your attention, your inner space. It's saying, I don't need to perform for anyone right now. I don't need to be consumed. I don't need to be understood to exist. That kind of stillness scares people, not because it's dangerous in itself, but because it threatens the system. A person who no longer needs to be validated is impossible to control. A person who doesn't chase applause begins to hear their own rhythm. And in a culture that runs on distraction and dependence, someone who finds peace in solitude becomes a threat, a mirror held up to those still lost in the noise. Choosing solitude is like stepping out of the current of a rushing river. Everyone else is being carried downstream toward trends, opinions, pressure, approval, and suddenly you stop. You find the shore, you sit in stillness, and in that silence you hear something profound. Yourself. It's not an easy rebellion. At first, it feels like exile. Your phone goes quiet, your calendar clears. The buzz of activity fades and what remains is unsettling stillness. But within that stillness, you begin to see clearly. You begin to detox from the mental pollution of the outside world. You begin to reawaken the parts of yourself that had been buried under noise. And that's what makes chosen solitude so powerful. It's not a retreat from life. It's a return to it, a return to depth, to truth, to presence, to the parts of you that never needed a stage, only silence. In that silence, you reclaim your power, not by shouting louder than the crowd, but by stepping away from it altogether. Not with rage, but with quiet clarity. Solitude, when chosen, becomes the most beautiful rebellion, a calm refusal to let the world define you. In the constant noise of everyday life, your true voice gets buried. You can't hear it over the notifications, the expectations, the conversations that don't nourish you. You respond to messages before you respond to your own needs. You listen to podcasts, influencers, mentors, advice columns, all telling you who you should be, what you should do, how you should think. And yet, deep inside, a quieter voice is trying to speak. It always has been. But here's the truth. You can't hear that voice until everything else goes quiet. Solitude isn't just about being alone. It's about clearing the space, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, for something more honest to rise. It's the moment when all the other voices fade and the only one left is yours. But not the voice you've practiced to fit in, not the one that mimics what you've learned to survive. No, in solitude, you meet the voice underneath the masks, the one that speaks not from fear, but from truth. That voice might be shaky at first. You may not trust it. After all, you've spent years ignoring it, overriding it with logic or social pressure. You've told it to be quiet every time it asked you to walk away from something that didn't feel right or step into something that scared you. But it hasn't left you. It's still there, waiting to be remembered. Solitude brings that voice back into focus. It becomes louder not by force but by clarity. And when you begin to hear it again, really hear it, something shifts. Decisions that used to confuse you become simple. You stop asking the world for permission. You stop polling other people for answers you already carry within. This is the sacred gift of chosen solitude. Self-trust. And self-trust can only be built when you're finally willing to be alone with yourself long enough to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. In that quiet space, you start to recognize which thoughts are truly yours and which were inherited, conditioned, or implanted by fear. You begin to distinguish between what is authentic and what is performative. You no longer feel the need to impress anyone. You begin to speak, act, and create from a place of inner alignment, not external approval. And when that voice returns, it doesn't shout. It whispers, but its power is undeniable. Because once you rediscover your own voice, you stop chasing the noise of the world, and instead you become a force the world quietly begins to follow. Real transformation doesn't begin in chaos. It doesn't begin in crowded rooms, loud applause, or external praise. It begins in silence, the kind that makes you uncomfortable at first, the kind that forces you to confront the thoughts you've been avoiding. It's in that stillness where the shift truly begins. Not a surface change, but a deep, cellular kind of awakening. Silence strips away everything that isn't essential. It reveals what's been buried under the noise of productivity, social pressure, and emotional distraction. You start to notice patterns you've ignored, why you react the way you do, where your insecurities stem from, what beliefs you've carried that were never really yours. And once those truths come into view, you can't unsee them. That's the beginning of transformation. Most people avoid this part because silence is confronting. It feels like withdrawal at first, a kind of emotional detox. You're left alone with the weight of your decisions, your mistakes, your unhealed wounds. No one else to blame. No distractions to numb the discomfort. Just you and the honest reflection of your life, unfiltered. But here's the paradox. The very thing that feels like breakdown is actually breakthrough. The discomfort is not a sign of something going wrong. It's a sign that something real is finally beginning. Just like a wound needs stillness to close, the mind and soul need silence to heal, to regenerate, to evolve. In silence, your brain begins to function differently. Psychology and neuroscience both show that solitude activates deep regions of the brain linked to creativity, memory, emotional regulation, and problem solving. The clarity that seemed impossible in the noise arrives in flashes of insight. The ideas that once felt blocked begin to flow. Your inner world reorganizes itself. You don't need to try harder. You just need to get quieter. Silence isn't absence, it's alchemy. And once you pass through that first layer of discomfort, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to feel calm, not because your life is perfect, but because your perspective has changed. You're no longer reacting, you're responding. You're no longer rushing, you're realigning. And from that silence, a new self begins to emerge. Not the version shaped by noise, but the one carved out by clarity, born in stillness, and anchored in truth. No one tells you this at the beginning of the journey. The first thing you'll feel when you choose solitude is not peace, it's pain. Not clarity, but confusion. Not healing, but a strange kind of internal chaos. That's the part most people never talk about. And it's also the reason most people never make it through. Because before solitude becomes your sanctuary, it feels like a prison. When the noise of the world finally stops, the noise within gets louder. Every suppressed emotion rises. Every memory you've buried tries to break the surface. There's no one around to distract you. No one to perform for, just you and the raw weight of your existence. And that can feel unbearable at first. You might pace the room, you might reach for your phone without thinking. You'll feel a strange kind of itch, the need to escape, but there's nowhere to run. And that's exactly the point. That's the gate, the threshold between the life you've known, reactive, dependent, distracted, and the life that's waiting on the other side, grounded, clear, and free. But to get there, you have to pass through discomfort. It's not a flaw in the process. It is the process. We've been conditioned to believe that discomfort is a sign to stop. But in solitude, discomfort is the signal that you're getting closer. It's like detoxing from an addiction to distraction, an addiction to being needed, noticed, or validated. The body and mind resist. They beg for noise. But the longer you stay, the more your system adapts. The panic softens. The restlessness fades. What felt unbearable begins to feel tolerable, then quiet, then necessary. And in that moment, something incredible happens. You begin to transform. You start hearing thoughts you didn't know you had. You notice emotional wounds you'd numbed for years. You sit in silence and realize you've been running from yourself, not because you're weak, but because no one ever taught you how to stay. Staying is the first act of inner strength. If you can stay through the discomfort, if you can sit in the stillness without reaching for escape, you unlock something most people will never find: emotional freedom. The kind of freedom that can't be bought, imitated, or borrowed. The kind of freedom that makes you unshakable, not because you have no fear, but because you're not afraid to face it alone. And that's what makes solitude powerful. Not because it feels good immediately, but because you're willing to sit with what doesn't. The pain is the portal, discomfort is the gate, and your courage to stay is the key. True emotional freedom doesn't come from cutting ties with others. It comes from strengthening the connection with yourself. And that connection can only be forged in solitude. Not the kind of solitude that's forced or circumstantial, but the kind you choose intentionally. The kind that requires courage. The kind that strips away all the noise and leaves you with the most important question of all. Do I even know how to be with myself without needing anything from anyone? Most people live in a constant loop of emotional dependence. They crave approval, recognition, affection, not because they're selfish, but because they've been taught that their emotional worth comes from others. They've been conditioned to believe that validation must come from the outside in, so they chase love. They chase acceptance. They measure their self-worth based on how people respond to them. But what happens when the applause stops? When the room is empty and the texts go unanswered? That's when most people start to spiral, because they have never built the emotional infrastructure to stand on their own. This is where chosen solitude becomes a sacred training ground. When you spend time alone, not lonely, but alone with intention, you begin to see all the places where your self-worth was outsourced. You notice how much you depended on compliments to feel confident, how much you relied on attention to feel seen, and how easily rejection shattered your sense of value. Solitude doesn't just expose these patterns, it begins to heal them. At first, it's disorienting. You might feel hollow like a balloon without air. But that emptiness isn't a failure. It's a clearing for something more authentic to rise. And as you stay with yourself, you begin to fill that space with your own presence. Not borrowed energy, not reactive emotion, just you. And then something subtle but powerful happens. You stop needing. Not in a hardened, detached way, but in a peaceful, grounded way. You no longer need someone to make you feel loved. You already do. You no longer need someone to affirm your path. You've already chosen it. You stop fearing rejection because you no longer reject yourself. This is emotional freedom. The ability to feel your own presence so fully that you're no longer chasing after emotional scraps. You don't need to beg for love, attention, or approval. And when you do love others, it's not out of emptiness. It's out of abundance. Solitude teaches you that you are enough, not in a cliché, motivational post kind of way, but in a visceral, lived experience. You sit with yourself, and for the first time you realize, I am whole even here, especially here. And once you know that, once you've tasted the peace that comes from emotional self-sufficiency, no one can take it away from you. That's real freedom. the kind the world can't give you, and therefore can't take from you either. Life lesson: you are enough without the noise. In a world that constantly demands your attention and measures your worth through likes, relationships, and recognition, choosing solitude becomes a radical act of self-respect. But beyond the peace and stillness, solitude offers something even more valuable: emotional freedom. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. You don't need to earn love through perfection or approval. The more time you spend alone, intentionally, not out of loneliness, but out of curiosity, the more you begin to realize that everything you have been chasing from others already exists within you. Emotional freedom doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop depending on them to feel okay. It means you can love deeply, but not desperately. You can walk away when something no longer serves you, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. You can say no without guilt and yes without fear. In practice, this means giving yourself time each day to unplug, not just from devices, but from external validation. Journaling without an audience, taking a walk without music, sitting in silence long enough to feel your own emotions instead of numbing them. It's in these moments that your inner voice grows stronger, more honest, and more confident. And over time, something shifts. You stop asking others who you are. You stop measuring your happiness against someone else's highlight reel. You begin living from the inside out, not the outside in. That's the lesson solitude teaches you. You are not broken. You are not missing anything. You are simply buried beneath layers of noise. Peel them back. Listen deeply. Trust yourself, because when you find peace in your own company, you stop searching for someone else to complete you. You realize you were always enough.